guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military industrial complex.
What's up, everybody? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricky Varandas. Today we have Ray McGovern. He worked for the CIA from 1963 to 1990, so 27 years in the CIA. He also was a part of preparing the president's daily briefings. So what that means is that 6 days a week, I think it was 6 days a week with most presidents. I know the times change from president to president. It's all preference on how early they want to get up in the morning, but he would basically gather intel from the CIA and so this is highly classified stuff, and then go through it with the president. So he dealt with some really classified information, and then he ended up retiring and becoming an activist. So he's a really interesting guy. He's had a couple viral videos with a confrontation he had with Hillary Clinton, where she just continues talking and smiling and on with her speech while Ray is getting beaten up and taken out of the facility where she's talking, because he stood up and turned his back towards her, and she doesn't miss a beat. So it's kind of weird, but it shows you how good she is at acting and just keeping a straight face. And he also has an incident with Rumsfeld where he questions him about, I believe it was the Iraq War, and the information that got us in there. And I remember just Rumsfeld just stuttering over his words, and he was just obviously lying. And so I give him a lot of props for being in the inside and now being so outspoken. He's also been in the James Corbett podcast, which I'm sure if you guys are listening to this show, you're definitely a listener of that show. And I hope to have him on soon too to talk about his new film, How Big Oil Conquered the World. Great documentary, so please check that out. But frequent guest James Corbett, and he's also been on Democracy Now!, he's been on RT, he's been on a bunch of different places, so I'm sure you might have seen his face somewhere. He's also been on London Real, and he's a very interesting guy. He doesn't consider himself a historian, but I kind of do, because he's just very well researched and very knowledgeable about geopolitics and current events and historical events. We talk about the Cold War, we talk about the history of the CIA, we talk about a lot of really interesting topics. So the bad news is your host is a jackass, because what I end up doing, unfortunately in the last couple months has been kind of rough. We had a family member who's been terminally ill, and so if certain shows I've been kind of scattered brain, or I haven't put out as many shows as maybe you'd like. I mean, this show should have been out already like a week or two ago. Today's the 2nd of February, and probably should have been out mid-January or the end of January, whenever the hell I did this episode. And but we've had somebody who's terminally ill, and we just lost him, unfortunately, and which sucks. And obviously you're scatterbrained and you have a lot on your mind, and I end up saving, I believe, another podcast I did over this one. When I was doing some editing, I ended up saving it on top of this one, and I couldn't retrieve it. That's why it took a while for me to get this one out. I do have a program, a software that records my Skype conversation. So on my end, the quality's going to suck a little bit, because the software picks up my webcam, I believe, or whatever mic's attached to my computer. But on his end, whatever mic he uses is what it picks up. So he sounds pretty good. I kind of sound like shit a little bit, but I think it's very much tolerable, and hopefully you guys can listen to it, and I didn't fuck up the episode by giving you something that's not listenable. Podcast listeners, if it's interesting, they can put up with sometimes some poor quality, but from his end, his quality is actually quite good, so it won't be too bad. But thanks to everybody who sticks by the show. Please rate the show. I know 99% of people who listen to the show don't rate the show. Obviously, I've seen the download numbers, and I know that a lot of people listen, and a lot of people continuously listen to each episode when it gets released. But if anybody does give it a good rating, send me a screenshot on Twitter, Facebook, our Facebook page, The Ripple Effect Podcast, or email me at rvtheory6@aol.com, and I'll send you a bumper sticker, a ripple effect bumper sticker. And I think that's it for now. Remember the RV Theory 6 YouTube channel, or just look up the Ripple Effect podcast. You can see me and Pete. Why do I almost call him Pete McGrain? Which I think I talk about Pete McGrain on this podcast. He's the Irish filmmaker who did the movie Ethos, the documentary Ethos with Woody Harrelson. But Ray McGovern and I have a Skype video conversation, so at least you can see the video of us talking. And not to go on a rant, but the good thing about a funeral and a wake and dealing with facing the fact that we're only mortals is the fact that it reminds us that we're only mortals. And I think when we wake up every morning and we do the same routine, and our alarm clock goes off at the same time, and we make our coffee at the same time, we go to the same job at the same time, and get stuck in traffic at the same time, I think you get my point. We do a lot of things similar every day. We ignore the fact that tomorrow's not promised, and anytime something bad happens to somebody, we always assume, oh, that's them. There's just this group of people who bad things happen to all the time. They're the ones who lose loved ones. They're the ones who die of diseases. They're the ones who get in car accidents. They're the ones who do whatever. And we just assume, every time we read something or hear something in the news, we assume, oh, it's them, it's not me, and we assume that we have still a long life ahead of us. And that's not the way things go, unfortunately. I think that's why people have these shocks when something does happen to them or their family members or their loved one, because I think that we are in denial of death a little bit. We tend to ignore it until we can't anymore. And like I said, the one good thing that comes out of these funerals and wakes, besides bringing family together and stuff like that, and is that you really start appreciating the little things, and you start appreciating and people around you. And one thing we talk a lot about on the show is materialism. I can't even talk. And the fact that we just buy a bunch of shit that we can't afford, and then we die, and we kind of miss out on the simple things of conversation. And you guys probably know by now that I like cigars and whiskey, and it's more about a reason to sit down with friends and conversate and hang out and enjoying our senses that we kind of ignore so much of our lives, which is smells and tastes. And I think all that stuff's really important. And I think having an activist on, Ray McGovern, who's made his life work now to protest and be outspoken, I think that's awesome. He's using his time as best as he can, and I think we should all do that. I think guilt's one of my best friends, because anytime I go a long time without doing something, or I feel like I'm not living a fulfilled life, or what's my purpose, or am I really doing my best to use whatever time I have here wisely, which is unknown. We don't know how much time that is. And I think sometimes we like to pretend we know, like, when I die, that's far from here. Wherever I am right now, it's far from here. I can't see the finish line yet. You figure you can't see the finish line until you're in your 70s or 60s or maybe even 80s. And that's when you start thinking about your funeral and your death and what you leave behind, and you start looking at things differently. You stop caring so much about what type of car you drive, or how hot your wife or girlfriend is, or how nice your clothes are, and all these things are just pointless for the most part. And you start caring about friends and family, and enjoying the simple things and company. And even though technology's changed quite a bit, and we have other ways of entertaining ourselves, I think for the most part, one thing that has never changed is the fact that we love being around other people. And Skype doesn't make up for that. Phone calls don't make up for that. And no type of digital technology will make up for that. I think we'll forever enjoy being around each other and having groups of friends together. And I think one thing about old quotes is that a lot of them still make sense today, because even though our environment has changed, we haven't changed that much. And we're still lacking on of the same things, and we still struggle with the same things, and we still have the same tendencies and habits. So I guess I'll cut this intro short, because it's probably not that short. It's probably already 10 minutes long, but I'll cut it now because I'm gonna go on a rant, and I can see myself talking and having a 1 hour podcast of me just ranting. But thanks again, guys. I really appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. Everybody who listens to this show, I'm sure if you're listening, you probably are also starting your own ripple effect, because I'm sure you're not into these topics without being outspoken, or at least sparking these conversations with your friends and family, and having the similar conversations that I have on this show with your own in your own life. So I'm glad you are, because I think we're all doing our part for our children or our friends or just the future of humanity. We're doing our part and trying to leave the world a little better than we received it. So until the next one, peace.
Thank you so much for your work. I respect the hell out of people like you who have the balls to, go out and ask hard questions, Rumsfeld, or do what you did with Hillary. And I give you a lot of credit. It reminds me of the Code Pink women, because they're ballsy, and probably the wrong term to use for women, ballsy. But you know what I mean.
That's a high compliment.
But thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Welcome.
So people who might not be familiar with you, how did you, to have somebody...
Let me know when we're starting, right?
Oh, well, we can start right now. We're good to go.
All right, let me just have a cup of coffee here.
Yeah, no problem. But while you're having that, yeah, because I have a retired aunt and her husband, who is my uncle, but not by blood, by marriage, who are both retired from the FBI. And I try every once in a while, we have a family get together, and I'll try to grill them to get, just see if I can get them to talk about anything. And it's amazing how little they'll give you. And actually, I kind of tend to believe them, but they talk about how little they know about what the other one was doing. They would see each other in the office once in a while, but you really didn't know what other people were working on. And to live that life of secrecy and stuff like that is always intriguing. And you dealing with such delicate information. Did you kind of have to do the same thing? Was it hard not to have these conversations with friends of yours, or kind of give out too much information when probably you had a lot on your mind that you wanted to share?
Well, I served overseas for a couple of tours, and there, of course, it was very different. But here in the States, my function was sort of a glorified journalist / academic. My job was to sift through all the information on Soviet foreign policy, whether it be open sources or the most sensitive sources from intercepts or satellites or our own spies, put it all together and report to the president about what we think the Soviets are up to, or what their policy was, and how they would react to this or that course of action. So the neat thing was that Central Intelligence Agency, we were set up precisely for two reasons. One being one central place where all the information on a given country or issue would end up in one inbox. Now, people your age, Ricky, I have to kind of persuade them that there really were wood inboxes, okay? And that's what used to happen. Into my wooden inbox would come, about 4 or 5 times a day, all manner of information from our operations center. The fellow would really Safeway type card. Soviet foreign policy, put it in my box. It was my job to look at all that information, and since it was the Soviet Union, about every month or two, I would have a story to tell that the President of the United States would read the next morning. That's as good as it gets. Would it be corrected up the line? Well, spelling errors and errors in grammar, yeah, all right. But if they agreed with my take, and they usually did, then that's what the President would be told the next morning. Now, that was the function that Truman envisaged when he set up the CIA. And he came out of Pearl Harbor, in other words, he knew the experience of Pearl Harbor when, as some of you know, all manner of information was available. We had broken some of the Japanese code, for Pete's sake. There was information from the code breakers, from the Navy, from the Army Air Force, from the FBI, from our own spies, from media in Tokyo, from the embassy, the Japanese embassy in Washington. So the problem was there was no central place, and I used that adjective advisedly. There was no central place where all that information came into one inbox, and somebody could say, well, where the heck is the Japanese fleet anyway? You know, anybody know? Hello, you know, there was a submarine in Honolulu. Well, what was that? You know, there was nobody to ask those questions or put it all together. So
So you
that
think
was
there was a lack of information that Pearl Harbor that had happened? That because I mean I hear alternative theories from different historians that it could have been prevented. They had enough information to know it was coming. It was kind of instigated a little bit with the sanctions and stuff too. But from some of the other theories was that we let it happen for the sake of giving us a reason to drop the bomb because Project Manhattan and we had all this invested in it, and it was also dropping the bomb was important because it would send a signal to the Soviet Union, which we knew was going to be I guess a threat, or at least somebody we had our attention on. It would be another world power militarily wise. So I mean, do you subscribe to that, or do you think that there's not enough information to back that up?
Ricky, there are all kinds of theories, all kinds of historians. Now, the scenario that you're focused on is really 4 years later, 1945. 1941, we were just starting to work on the atomic bomb. It was, in my view, a genuine surprise. Now, the ancillary question there is, should it have been a surprise? And the answer to that is no. There was enough information around there, but people screwed up because there was no central place. And that's what I'm getting at here. That's what Truman knew. And that's why after the war, he said, now I'm going to have a central intelligence agency where people will be held. Here in Washington, you're not allowed to use the word, Ricky. It's accountable, okay? Responsible, accountable, okay? People would be accountable for looking into that box and figuring out what was going on and telling the president. So that was one thing. The other thing was that the president didn't want to put it under the Pentagon. You know, the Pentagon was telling him that the Russians were 15 feet tall, and he knew they weren't quite that tall. And the State Department was always defending its policy. He wanted people to report directly to him, okay? And that's why he set up the Central Intelligence Agency right under the White House. So we worked for the president. Our job in the analysis division was to tell it like it is, to tell the president without fear or favor what was going on. Now, did the president have to form his policy based on the intelligence he gave him? Of course not. The president has other political considerations to take into account. And so with respect to Vietnam, for example, when Lyndon Johnson came into office and he had this problem, what he's going to do about this terrible war, well, those generals with the blue suits on, those Air Force guys, well, they told him what the prescription was. This was going to fix everything. And so Johnson came to us and he said, now, those boys in the blue suits, they all say that they got these B-52 bombers. They're the biggest thing out there. And they got big bombs to match the big 52s. And so they say they want to seal off the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and Ho Chi Minh won't give up. We're going to win the war. What do you guys think? Now, we kind of suppressed a smile or a laugh, waited a decent interval, 2 days, and went back and we said, Mr. President, two things you need to know. One is that the Ho Chi Minh Trail doesn't look anything like I-66 or I-95 or I-85 or the 5. It's like 162 trails through the jungle, most of which you can't even see because of the jungle canopy. Now, even if these B-52 bombers could create so many holes that nobody could get across the border, Ho Chi Minh's not going to give up. We know Ho Chi Minh. Some of our colleagues brought him into Hanoi after the war on their shoulders. We supported him. We helped him get rid of the Japanese. We know him. He's not going to give up. He's a nationalist. He'll never give up. And besides that, Mr. President, we don't know of any country that has ever given up solely on the bombing. Now, that's what we told LBJ. Now, what did he do? Well, he decided, well, maybe I'll go with those generals. We'll see what happens. Okay. Why? Because he didn't want to be the first United States president to lose a war. And so he became the first U.S. president to lose a war. It's a tragic story. But the corollary to all this information I'm giving you is that even if you serve up to the president the pristine, pure, objective, good intelligence, presidents are not required to abide by those. They have other political considerations. That was one of the worst situations that we faced.
Well, in regards to Vietnam, because obviously he ignored your advice, what do you think was the motivation? What was pulling him in another direction, you think?
Well, it's hard for younger people to realize what the communist scare was.
Yeah, I think it's similar to the Islam scare today, but...
Yeah, it sure as heck is, yeah. But, there was a genuine fear of what the communists would do. And there was a lack of respect, really, for academics and historians who knew about Ho Chi Minh. Who knew that he was not primarily a communist. He was primarily a nationalist. And he had been cheated out of a reunified Vietnam by the United States and France. In 1954, we promised fair elections. Ho Chi Minh didn't get them. So what it was really was an inordinate fear that if communists came down into Southeast Asia, there would be the so-called domino effect. Sound pretty bad, huh? That means that not only would Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, maybe Thailand, maybe Indonesia, they'd all fall like dominoes to the communists, okay? Now, my job was a little bit more subtle. I was required to look at Russians' relations with China and with the international communist movement. And I could see that this shibboleth of this picture of a united communist movement, they're all commies, right? Well, the Russians and the Chinese hated each other, and they worked against each other. Even when it came to supporting the communists in Vietnam, they were such rivals. The Chinese wouldn't let Soviet aid through. Could you believe it? So we could prove this to policymakers, but still there was this kind of fear. Well, what if they're wrong? And what if Ho Chi Minh is first and foremost a communist? Of course, what kind of communist? Chinese communist or Russian communist? So the whole thing was overblown, and there weren't enough people around to say, look, Mr. President, this is a fool's errand. Vietnam cannot be gotten back. After World War II, the French sent out one of their famous generals, Leclerc was his name. He was a big war hero. And they said, now, General Leclerc, please tell us how many troops we would need to get back Indochina. So he goes out there, reports back in 6 months. He said, you would need 500,000 troops, and even then you couldn't do it. So fast forward. So that's 1946, right? Fast forward to 1965, 1966, 67, we have 535,000 troops in Vietnam, and we still couldn't do it. So the lack of a willingness on the part of Lyndon Johnson to get beyond this losing a war as president thing and realize the realities in Vietnam, and being he's a big guy, and he's very forceful, and people are afraid of him. And they were afraid to tell him the truth. Even some of our guys were afraid to tell him the truth. And so he was not very well served. Here's an example. He was wondering how he could ratchet up the war so he could win it, right? And we're talking about 1964. Well, out in the Gulf of Tonkin, there was a legitimate incident where U.S. Navy patrol boats were supporting, clandestine operations out that way. And the Vietnamese didn't like that. And so they took a couple of pot shots at these boats, no chance of hitting them actually, and they got out of the way. Well, that raised quite a stir in Washington. And on the next day, which is the 2nd of August, 1964, there was another ship there that thought it was being attacked. And it sent some signals back to NSA and to the Pentagon and to us. And so we're being attacked. But then within a couple hours, the commander of the fleet said, no, wait a second, rescind all those messages. There was just kind of a weird wave effect in the ocean, and my guys were just a little bit too nervous, so forget about it. Well, what happens? Why do I mention all this? The next day, August the 3rd, LBJ walks into the Situation Room in the White House. Now, how do I know this? I know this because McGeorge Bundy, who was his national security advisor, related this story on McNeil Lehrer many years after that, when McNamara first wrote his book. So what does McGeorge Bundy say? He says, well, this is very difficult because the president came in and he looked at me, and he's a great big guy, and he said, Mac, we got him now. You go up there and sell that resolution to Congress. We're going to go in big in this war. We're going to use our aircraft and so forth. And so McNeil says, well, what did you say? Well, McBundy says, well, I said, now, we're not really sure what happened last night, whether anything happened at all. And so what did the president say? Well, the president looked at me and he said, Mac, are you going up there to sell that resolution or are you not? McNeil, so what'd you do? Well, I went up and sold the resolution. Now, McGeorge Bundy was the dean of some school up in Yale or Harvard, I forget which one. He's not going to be out in the street, with his hat, out of a job. And yet, he didn't have the guts to say, Mr. President, I'm not going to do that. That's not all disingenuous. That's not only political. That's a lie. You're going to start a war on a lie? Oh, no. And that's the way power corrupts. Even closeness to power corrupts, and power itself corrupts absolutely. So George Bundy went up there. We got the Tonkin Gulf Resolution on, I think it was the 4th of August. No time wasted. And the war was on. The flights, the aircraft started bombing. And it was it was 9 years later that we finally ceased and desisted. Now, what that cost? Well, it cost 58,000 U.S. killed. How many wounded? Countless. But last time I checked the Bible, Vietnamese are human beings too. How many Vietnamese got killed during that war? Well, there are various figures, but the one that I cite is the one that Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara uses himself. And he says, pretty casually, 3 million Vietnamese killed. Wow. So all I'm saying is that intelligence can be pretty accurate. You will always get kind of some sycophants who place career ahead of the truth. But we had few of those, and we pretty much told LBJ like it is, and yet the political pressures on him was such that he continued the war. And then, of course, so did Nixon, because nobody wanted to give in to the communists.
Well, isn't there always a fear, too, of maybe the CIA or the intel being false and for the sake of another cause? I know I heard it, I forget which interview you were doing, where you said that you heard about the Chile coup from a newspaper, and you were working for the CIA at that time, doing a briefing for the president. And that was unreal to hear. I mean, that was pretty surreal to think that, there's so many things going on that, there could be hidden operations that people just didn't know about, and do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I do, because that really explains a whole lot. Let me give you a little historical background. After the war, as I said before, President Truman was hell-bent and determined that it not be another Pearl Harbor, and so he wanted this Central Intelligence Agency to have one inbox where all the information came on in a given issue or country, and that this person would not be wedded to what the Pentagon or the State Department said. He could tell the president like it is, right? Okay, well, that's what he envisaged, an analysis group that would have access to all the information available to the United States government, classified or unclassified. And that would include some case officers recruiting spies, because some information is not available any other way. So there was a clandestine aspect to this whole analysis division, and that was for the express purpose of recruiting spies to give us information that would help fill up our inbox. So we had to be a secret organization if we're going to be running spies and using that information. Now, in 1946, after the war, World War II, these very enterprising, really brave and imaginative people who worked in what we call the Office of Strategic Services, which was the forerunner to the CIA. These were folks that, they jumped behind lines, did overthrow governments. They were the covert action folks, okay? And they worked miracles, both in Europe and in the Far East. So they came home to Washington here, and they said, thanks a lot for all the applause. I mean, and it was well-deserved applause. And then they said, well, thanks a lot, but you want us to hang around? You got work for us? No. Think about it. 1946, 1947. The Russians had overrun Eastern Europe. The KGB, their secret service, was overthrowing governments all around the world. And so, the question answered itself. They said, well, of course we need you. If the Russians are overthrowing governments, we have to be able to overthrow governments too, right? Okay, that was the thinking. So I said, yeah, stay around. And then the big question, where are we going to put these guys? I mean, we can't have a Department of Covert Action. We can't have a overthrowing government agency. We couldn't even have one if we called it regime change agency, too transparent, right? So I know it would do some, I don't know what the right word is, but he wasn't very bright. I said, we'll put him in with the analysts, the CIA, because they have to be secret. This has to be secret. We'll have one big happy family. Now, Ricky, that's what I called a structural fault from the very beginning. You can't have one person, head of, we call him the Director of Central Intelligence in those days. Now it's called the Director of National Intelligence. You can't have one person responsible for objective analysis about, for example, what's going on in Nicaragua, and that same person responsible for running a war in Nicaragua. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And so, I'll give you an example. So the analyst on Nicaragua realizes that this is a fool's errand. There are no Russians really coming up through Nicaragua and Mexico up into Texas. Give me a break. Now, he goes before Congress, and they say, what do you really think of Nicaragua? Now, if that analyst has a couple of kids and a mortgage and needs the job, do you think he's going to say, well, Casey and Bobby Gates are out of their gourd, they see a communist under every rock. It's a fool's errand. It's not a threat to us. Is he going to say that? Give me a break. It's going to be really hard for him to say that. That's why they probably never let him near the Congress. So if Congress and other people want objective information, you can't have a person who's responsible for running little wars, responsible for overthrowing governments, as in Chile, and have him also responsible for telling the truth to the president or anyone else. You mentioned Chile. Now, this is kind of a down-to-earth, on-the-ground example. I was working with the most sensitive of information, and I was cut out of that. So much so that I was told not to change anything overnight, and nobody told me why. I got up the next morning, and there's a coup in Chile, run by Dick Helms, my boss, who was head of the CIA at the Times, and later lied about it. Now, just to give you an idea of the culture on the operational, like the regime change or overthrowing government side of the agency, he lied to Congress. He lied to Congress about his role in Chile. And instead of giving him some jail time, they let him plead nolo contendere, And so he got off with, I think it was a $2,000 fine. Now, what I remember is going down to this mammoth cafeteria that's still there at Langley, and Helms was coming back, and the place was packed, almost all with operations type people, just a couple analysts like me. You know what they did? The applause lasted 5 minutes. And you know what they did then? They passed the hat around and collected $2,000 like that.
Wow.
They're really proud of this guy. That's the ethos. Lying to Congress? Give me a break. Congress doesn't entitle to know these are real secrets. So what I'm saying here is that there has been this very, very real distinction between analysts and operators. As a matter of fact, when I first came into the agency in the new building up there in Langley under John Kennedy, I couldn't go to the operational part of the building, and they couldn't come to where the analysts were. There were turnstiles, and you have a special kind of permission to do it, okay? That's how hermetically sealed we were, one off against the other. And so that has all kinds of implications, of course. The person briefing president, like I was, I think should be entitled to know what's really going on. But the covert part of the agency has its own channels into the president. And the president, to the extent that he knows about it, he deals with two separate and distinct entities. And that's really not a good idea.
Now, while you're working for the agency and while things happened that were pretty clear that the CIA had some role in, like the Iran-Contras and the drug trafficking and the JFK assassination, and all these things happened. I mean, the stuff that came out with the MK Ultra and experimenting with LSD and stuff like that. You were working with the CIA during all this time, and while you're reading about these stories, did it ever provoke thought about, am I in the right place? Am I working for the good guys? Anything like that?
Sure. We could read the New York Times too. We could read what Cy Hirsch picked up about the so-called family jewels. There are a couple of sides to this, though. Every now and then you get a man of integrity in charge of the agency. And there was a fellow named Bill Colby. Whatever his experience was, and he was one of these covert action types, jumped into Norway and elsewhere in Europe during the war. He also knew what was important. And what is important to all of us is the solemn oath that we swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So, when Hirsch uncovered these terrible, terrible things, MK Ultra and everything else, Kissinger and Nixon said, okay, Bill Colby, just stonewall him, lead him down the garden path if they call you to testify. And Colby said, I'm sorry to tell you this, but I'm a lawyer, okay? And I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution, like actually all of us did, and I'm not going to lie to Congress. And so he told the truth. Now, he was forced to tell the truth, and he wasn't very comfortable doing it, but he did get cashiered for that. He lost his job. So there were two sides to it. It was terrible things that went on. Did we analysts know about them at the time? Of course not. This hermetically sealed business was obtaining. Now, after we learned about them, well, then it becomes a question of, here I am briefing the very top assistants to Ronald Reagan. And I'm talking about his vice president, secretary of state, secretary of defense, assistant to the president for national security affairs, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I had 2 or 3 of those every other morning. We worked in teams, okay? Now, could I do enough good in speaking truth to power in this unique situation where I did this alone, right? One-on-one. I could answer questions that were asked objectively and honestly if I knew the answer. If I didn't know the answer, of course, I would say, sir, I don't know the answer, but I'll find out for you. How soon do you need the answer, okay? It was incredibly heady stuff. I did that for 4 years. And during those 4 years, as it became a little bit more apparent, we're talking the 80s now, that the Iran-Contra thing was going on, which I read about in the papers. And when I found out that some of the people I was dealing with every other morning were knee deep into it, then it got kind of old, and so I decided to retire as soon as I could, and that was possible because I had served enough time overseas to retire at age 50, which I did. So it's a matter of kind of weighing whether you can do enough good at offset what your organization is also doing on the other side of the house, as we used to put it.
Yeah, and this is a conversation or a debate I've had with a lot of guests on, because we always kind of bounce the idea, like, what's the real motivation? Is it ideology? Is it is it like the neocons and them? This idea that America should be the policeman of the world, and we should be the strongest military, and we should dictate policy for everybody, or is it as simple as follow the money and the links between the Carlyle Group and Halliburton and the politicians? So obviously the links between the corporations and the politicians are going to have some influence on foreign policy. And I mean, from your perspective, what do you think it is? Do you think some of these people truly make these decisions, like the MK Ultra project? Do they do it because they honestly wanted to figure out a way that could help the CIA or the government in future projects to protect us, or were they really doing it for not more evil, I guess, reasons and not so pure reasons? I mean, do you think it's ideology that motivates people, or is it you follow the money, and once it comes to you look at the coups like we talked about in Chile, we look in all the proxy wars all over the world, from Nicaragua and Iran, just having influence in the revolution there in the early 70s. I mean, all these things, it's always, you research it and you always try to figure out, like, is it because they really believe in trying to make the world safer, or at least safer just for us, even if that means hurting other countries? Or is it really as simple as natural resources, and there's some canal they want to get control of, or some oil or opium or whatever it is? I mean, from your opinion, what do you think is the main motivation for a lot of these actions?
Well, you're talking, Ricky, really about policy, about how policy is set, and there's a difference between policy and intelligence in the purest sense. Now, that intelligence in the purest sense was done on the analysis side of the house. And I'm very proud to have served there. I mean, there are some very, very tangible benefits and results from that. For example, when it became clear that the Russians were willing to conclude arms limitations agreements with us. Ooh, were they really? Yeah, they were. Well, Nixon and Kissinger started to negotiate these things. And I had the privilege of being in Moscow when the first, what we call SALT talks, ended in success, Strategic Arms Limitation talks, okay? We concluded a treaty. It's called the ABM Treaty, the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. And that treaty prohibited each side to develop more than 2 anti-ballistic missiles sites. Now, why was that important? Because if you could only do 2 of those, there was no way that you could consider yourself immune from a counterattack if you launched an attack, okay? And so that's the balance of terror. That's the balance of power that obtained and kept the peace for a couple of decades, okay? Now, why do I mention that? Well, because Nixon says to us, well, can you verify that the Soviets won't cheat? And we said, yes, we can. And, well, how soon could you tell if they cheated? Well, it depends. If it was an ICBM, probably within 2 weeks. If it was an anti-ballistic missile thing, we could tell probably within a month. So on the strength of that, okay, that enabled these arms control agreements. That enabled this balance where neither side would think that they could, with impunity, launch what we call a first strike and escape retaliation. That's big stuff. You know, when Reagan later talked about doverai, no proverai, which is trust but verify, That's the story, but he's talking about us, okay? Now, I had 3 people working on SALT in the early 70s. One was on the SALT delegation negotiating with the Russians. One was supporting the military folks. And the other one was writing up the negotiations as they went along and giving the précis to Director Helms, who was director at the time. That was really heady stuff. And we had carte blanche to tell it like it is, okay? That helped to enable the conclusion of these agreements. Now, I have to say that one of the reasons, or I guess the reason, people say, well, McGovern, when did you fall off your horse? When did you get converted on the way to Damascus? And they're always terribly disappointed, because the honest answer to that is, it was a straight line, a straight line. I joined the agency when John Kennedy was president. I was one of those that came right to Washington as soon as he said, you might want to ask what you could do for your country rather than what your country could do for you. We were inspired. There's still some of us around, alive here in Washington. And so I was a specialist, and I had a graduate degree in Russian studies. So that was heady stuff. And I found out that I could do what they promised me. I could look into my inbox, and without tailoring it to whatever policy it was of the Pentagon or the State Department, I could tell the president what it was. So what I'm trying to get at here is that was sort of our brand, right? That was sort of our coin of the realm. Now, what happened? Well, I was working down in the inner city during the 90s, and I started to notice that it looked like George W. Bush, when he came into office, number one, he brought in with him all the people I knew, all the people we used to call the crazies, okay? The crazies. Now, who are they? Paul Wolfowitz, Richard Pearl, all these people that really wanted to zing the Russians and spread out our power throughout the world. And George H.W. Bush, whom I served when he was Director of Central Intelligence and also briefed every other morning when I was briefing the President's Daily Brief, he and I were friends. Friends. Like, when he came to speak at William & Mary, when my youngest son was graduating there, we spent a lovely half hour with him, my wife, myself, and my son. He was a very gracious, very nice person. And it was a pleasure to serve with him. And I was pretty used to dealing with him. So what am I saying? Well, at the end of the 90s, it became clear that George W. Bush, his son, had fallen in with very evil companions. I'm talking about Dick Cheney, of course. Here's a little aside on Dick Cheney. I have a very fervent Catholic woman who's a really good prayer, okay? Well, when Dick Cheney was doing his worst, she came to me, she said, Ray, every time he goes into the hospital, I pray so fervently, but I don't know if God hears my prayers. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, he always gets better. You got to keep your sense of humor in it. And he had Cheney, he had Wolfowitz, spelled all these guys in. So I wrote to George H.W., my friend, and I said, look, I'm really concerned that all these crazies are in there, and they're going to mislead your son into doing a war. That was January 2003. He wrote back. He said, Ray, I was thinking that the crazies, own handwriting, quotes the crazies.
Yeah.
I thought maybe they would have a handle, but my son is much too smart. I support him completely. Don't worry about it. Right, don't worry about it. Okay, so that's what happened. They came in there, and George W. was, you want to be listen to how many times he bragged about being the first war president of the 21st century. I mean, like that's a good thing to be proud of? Anyhow, He was hell-bent and determined to be better than his dad, stronger, and Dick Cheney played on that. So what did they do? After 9/11, we say this all the time in this town. After 9/11, everything, the next word, changed.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, whereas before 9/11, Condoleezza Rice, the assistant to the President for National Security Affairs, and Colin Powell had just said in the months before 9/11, Iraq has no weapons of mass destruction. Rice went further. She said, he's not even a threat to his immediate neighbors. He has been unable to rebuild his military strength. Quote, end quote. When did she say that? The 29th of July, 2001. Now, what happened? We know what happened. 29th, about 6 weeks later, there was 9/11. Now, guess what happened? All of a sudden, Saddam Hussein has all manner of weapons of mass destruction. It's as though we're being asked to believe that weapons of mass destruction descended from the heavens like manna for a soft landing on the sands of Iraq, where God had that terrible mistake God made to put our oil. I have to say it in that comic way because it was so. Now, you think that, was I the only person, or John Pilger, from whom I got this idea? Were we the only people that noticed that Condoleezza Rice said he wasn't a threat on the 29th of July, and then all of a sudden in August, or not in August, but in October, November, all of a sudden they had all these weapons of mass destruction. Well, it didn't parse, And Joe Wilson, who called them on it, the ambassador who went to Niger to try to find these yellow cake uranium things, he said, there's no yellow cake uranium deal. And this begs the question about what else they're lying about. He's talking, of course, about the alleged ties between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. Would you believe, Ricky, that 69% of the American people believed when we attacked Iraq that Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11?
Actually, I do believe that because I've read that statistic, and I actually thought it was a little higher. But I think that shows you how they understand that you can play on people's emotions. Because I think after September 11th, you got all these anthrax threats, which till this day, obviously there's a lot of question marks about where that came from and who was sending it. And then you look at all the code orange, code red. I mean, there's just all these scares. And I think that people, when they're thinking emotionally and not logically, they just played on that. And they knew that, if we could, and I think a little bit also was Joseph Goebbels. If you say a lie enough times, then it becomes true. And it's that whole propaganda thing. They repeatedly said, would use the word Saddam or Iraq, and then soon after talk about chemical weapons or September 11th, and just use all these words and just put them all together. And unfortunately, I think the average person just are too caught up in their day and taking care of their bills, their children, going to church, going to work, going wherever they're going, that's taking up their day. And then you put on the news at the end of the night before you pass out, and the only piece of information you're getting on what's going on in the world, or what, is really, who is really linked to September 11th, or what's really going on, is whatever the media tells you, that 5-10 minutes, maybe an hour while you pass out on the couch or before you go to bed. And then that's all your information. Most people don't have time to research and get that information. And, now I think that I think a lot more people are going online, to podcasts, to alternative websites, and Democracy Now!, James Corbett, even Alex Jones, I guess, for some information. And I think that that's awesome. But, in 2001, it was a lot of people, I think a lot more people still consider the media a reliable source. And I think that now with the internet, we can kind of do our own research and realize that, oh shit, we've been lied to, or wow, that's not accurate, but yeah, I think it's scary how they can manufacture consent. Like Noam Chomsky says, it's that they can manufacture consent. And if you're making your decisions based on information, and they can control the information you're getting, then they can control your decisions, or at least opinions on certain things. And that's why I think that Syria thing was a great success when Barack Obama was trying to get us in Syria, and the people said, no, we've had enough with wars. We're done with wars. No, we're not going. I don't care about this chemical weapons thing. And then all of a sudden, they start showing beheadings with ISIS, and they just attempted to scare us until eventually we were okay with us getting involved to some sense, and finally they got what they wanted. They got into Syria. So I think, media it's a very scary thing, this idea that you can't trust what we consider news, and it's a scary world, and what's your opinion on mainstream media and the information that people are getting? You think that people are starting to realize that, hey, you know what, this is all bullshit. We need to get more information. We need to research these I guess the information that they're giving us much better. And do you think that there's hope in the fact that people are possibly looking at other avenues for information? And do you think eventually it's going to be much harder to trick the public?
Well, Ricky, you've really put your finger on the main problem here. Iraq would not have been possible if the mainstream media hadn't acted like cheerleaders for the war. It was unconscionable. Now, of course, all those people have been sacked, right? Wrong. People who were cheerleaders in the Washington Post are still running the place, still running the op-eds and the editorials.
Yeah, but Phil Donahue gets fired when he was he was working for, what was it, MSNBC, and he got fired because he was anti the Iraq War. It's like we have short-term memory. We don't remember. I mean, you talked about Vietnam. We talked about it. I mean, does it seem like they capitalize on the fact that we live in these busy, hectic lifestyles that we so easily forget that Libya just happened. So, now we're trying to do the same thing in Syria. Recently Iraq happened, Vietnam. It's like we forget that it's just history repeating over and over again. What is it, do you think, that we just continuously make the same mistakes?
Well, Ricky, who owns the media?
Corporations.
Yeah. And take MSNBC or NBC. Last time I checked, GE owns at least 49% of NBC. Now, used to control the majority. Now, what does GE make its money from? Jet engines, all manner of very sophisticated weaponry. They have a medical division for MRIs and stuff. But how much of their profit margin comes from advertising on NBC or MSNBC? I don't know, but I would guess maybe 5%. Now, if you're that corporation and you see incentive to have war and to have more jet engines that you can build and sell on, I said, how much attention are you going to give to your news department, except to make sure they don't say anything that could bring some peace that would be bad for business? No, I exaggerate, but just by a little bit. The corporations that are running our media have most interest in what the Pope, I don't usually subscribe to a lot of what the Pope says, but when he was here in Congress, he had the guts to talk about the blood-soaked arms traders. Now, what's he talking about? He's talking about the people who have offered Saudi Arabia 100 billion with a B, dollars worth of arms during Obama's administration. How much have they been approved? 50 billion. 50 billion. Now that's not small potatoes, okay? And so why do you get statesmen or officials sweating every time they're asked a question about Saudi Arabia, and where they go like this, and they can't say Saudi Arabia is funding, aiding and abetting the terrorists in Syria? Oh, hey, come on, man. We'll get a lot of money out of this thing. Don't put the Saudi noses out of joint. So you mentioned this at the beginning. Money drives a lot of this stuff. And money can't be made if there's a lot of peace. Think about Ukraine. Now, before we managed a coup in Ukraine, that is in Kiev, on the 22nd of February, 2014, okay? That was our coup, okay? George Friedman, who runs a think tank called Stratfor, which some people think is really just a division of the CIA, he had probably in a weak moment, he said, you know, that coup that we ran in Kiev was the most blatant coup in history. He said that a year ago. Well, it was. Why did he say that? Well, because it's the only coup that I know of that was advertised beforehand. Now, you know the expression, the revolution will not be televised. Well, that may be, but this coup was YouTubeized, you know. So for those people watching us on YouTube, 2 weeks before the coup, actually 2.5 weeks, an intercepted conversation between the Assistant Secretary for European Affairs, Victoria Nuland, and the U.S. Ambassador in Kiev, Jeffrey Pyatt, went like this. Victoria: all right, Mr. Ambassador, we're all set then. Everything's set up here. Now, Yats is the guy, Yats. You have Klitschko and those other fellows. They wait in the wings. You have to manage this thing, but we've got it all under control. Yats is our guy. He knows about the central bank. He knows what needs to happen with respect to austerity. Yats is the guy, okay? Now, somebody intercepted that. I suppose the Russian security people put it on YouTube. Now, 2.5 years, 2.5 weeks, 2.5 weeks later, I wake up on the 23rd of February, turn the radio on, and what do I hear? There's been a coup in Kiev, in Ukraine. And who's the new prime minister? Yats! The guy's name is Yatsenyuk, you know? And so I immediately wrote an article saying, yikes, it's Yats! No, in my day, you know, we weren't, the operator parts were not very ashamed of much, but they were, well, let's put it this way. If the new prime minister that was designated to take over after a coup if his name got into the press, a decent respect for the opinions of mankind would have kind of disqualified for this guy, you know. They'd have to appoint somebody else now. So who was the prime minister? Yatsenyuk. Who's the prime minister now? Yatsenyuk. So what I'm saying here is that these things happen for a reason. In Ukraine, of course, caused lots of tension in Europe. And getting back to how I started this, there are all kinds of arms manufacturers and arms traders profit immensely by this tension over Ukraine. For example, there's a big armament manufacturer called Maffei in Germany. It has its counterpart in France. It was a conglomerate, a coalition. And they were building the common European battle tank. Okay. But you know what? There wasn't much enthusiasm for it because it was very expensive, sort of a sitting duck, a little bit anachronistic. But guess what happened? As soon as the tensions in the Ukraine rose, man, Maffei's stock went up. Finally, we're going to get our common European battle tank. Is that great or what? So these things, that's a little microcosmic thing. But to the extent that you can stoke tensions, there's a lot of money in it. There's a lot of there are a lot of benefits for the people who have money and want still more. I don't understand what you do with your second million, but I guess there's a lot of things I don't understand, Ricky.
Yeah, well, there's a video of Victoria Nuland actually stating that the U.S. invested, I don't know if it was $5 billion in the coup in Ukraine, and it's amazing how it's like an open secret. It's completely okay that our hard-earned taxpayer money, which our country is telling us we don't have money for healthcare, we don't have money for this, we don't have money for that, we don't have money to rebuild our roads and highways and bridges that are falling apart, but yet we just recklessly throw this money around like it's nothing. And yeah.
No, I was going to say she's proud of it, and let me tell you how it works. You mentioned Syria before. Now, we know the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq weren't there. We know that there were no ties at all between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. They hated each other. But we've been led to believe by the media that Bashar al-Assad gassed his own people. Right, Ricky? He gassed his own people. Guess what? It's a lie.
Of course it is. Why would you have the strongest nation on earth say that, hey, we will get involved if you gas your own people, then why would you be dumb enough to gas your own people and give them a reason to get involved? I mean, it makes, even without any research whatsoever, it made zero sense to me when I first heard it. And I mean, the fact that we can't even do the two things we're publicly trying to say we're doing. We're trying to fight ISIS, but we're trying to have a regime change. And ISIS is fighting Assad. So if we fight ISIS, then it hurts us from getting Assad out of power. And if we get Assad out of power, we help ISIS. I mean, it just doesn't even none of it makes any sense. And now, people talk about gas prices being really low and that being a geopolitical strategy to harm Venezuela and Russia, because their biggest exports is natural gas and oil. And so it seems like there's all these things going on. And what does it seem like from your perspective? And obviously, you're much more knowledgeable on what's going on than I am. What do you see going on? I mean, does it seem like? It seems like we're at the break of a World War II. Just the way World War II, you had these teams. You had these group of countries that were allies and working together, and then and then it just takes one incident. You look at Russia not shooting down some Turkish planes. You look at all these, or vice versa, Turkey shooting down a Russian plane. You have Russia bombing some ISIS oil fields, which supposedly the oil was going to Turkey, and they're buying it. They're one of the buyers of the oil. I mean, there's all these things going on. It seems like a chessboard. And what do you think's going on? What do you think the picture is, the end game?
Well, you've done your homework, Ricky, and I compliment you on that.
Thank you.
And if anybody has been following this pretty closely, they should be confused.
Yeah, I am. I definitely am.
I'll tell you, if you're not confused, you just don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Now, let me tell you how I figured it out, okay? At the time when Obama stepped back from the brink, after he was provoked, really, this is kind of a false flag attack, Somebody persuaded Obama to say in August of 2012, red line. You move or you use some chemical weapons, red line. That's when we get involved militarily, okay? So what happens? Oh, somebody violates the red line. And everybody says, it was Bashar al-Assad. And so, a little syllogism here. You can't violate the red line. They did violate the red conclusion. We got to blast them. And he was just hours from authorizing this attack. And you mentioned the citizen uproar around here, the fact that the British, for the first time in 3,054 years, voted against the war, okay? And there are all kinds of things at play here. So Obama stepped back from this war. But what was the flat fact that was adduced to justify this? Well, it was the sarin attack outside Damascus on the 21st of August, 2013. Now we know that sarin attack was not done by Bashar al-Assad, despite the fact that Secretary of State John Kerry said he did it 35 times on the 30th of August that year. He didn't do it. And what we have now is proof. And nobody knows about this because it's only been in the Turkish press. What's the proof? A Turkish parliamentarian had been given the records of a court procedure where indictments were given to 13 Turks and others who were accused of facilitating the transport of chemicals, including sarin, from Europe, actually, through Turkey into Syria, where they would be manufactured and put together by Syrian rebels. And this Turkish parliamentarian, his name is Eren Erdim, has gone before Parliament and said, I have the case here. It's case number such and such. It was adjudicated in this part of the prosecutor in this part of Turkey, and then all of a sudden they released the prisoners and stopped the case. And so what's happened? Well, Erdogan, the president, has said, well, this guy he's a traitor, and looks very likely that he'll end up in jail like so many journalists and others. But, is this important? Of course it's important. It's proof positive. It's documentary evidence that it was a false flag attack, arranged with the help of the Turkish intelligence service. Now, why do no Americans know about this? You know the answer to that, okay? There's only one newspaper in English that ran that story, and that was the Belfast Telegraph up in Northern Ireland. So I've just written an article about that, hopefully to get it into the mainstream media. We'll see if that happens, but this stuff still happens. You still have the mainstream media avoiding, like the plague, evidence that, based on documents, example, the drone warfare. Now, somebody very clever and very courageous has followed the example of Edward Snowden and given all kinds of internal, bona fide documents to The Intercept, this this outfit that publishes these things. And guess what? Nobody knows about them. Why? Because the Western press have been told not to run them. They show that the drone wars are counterproductive. They show that several times as many civilians have been killed as military people. And they show all manner of idiocy for this drone war, and yet they've been pretty much blacklisted, just as I and many of my friends are blacklisted. They won't let us in the media. So what's the bottom line? The fourth estate is dead. Dead. And that gives me hope, because the fifth estate, which is in the ether, so I don't know how it comes to be that I can talk to you like this, or that the people can listen, but I love it. And so it's really up to people like you and people watching this to make sure that they find out where to get good information. You mentioned Amy Goodman, Democracy Now! Now, I watch that every morning, 5 days a week. Why? Because she's the very best. And I learn just as much about American history as I do about what's going on abroad. But that's one thing I recommend to every college kid that I talk to, and for anybody else. So there are ways of getting this information, but it's a tough slog. But I have hope, because most people realize that the mainstream media is moribund, if not dead, and that the only way to find out the truth is to tune into programs like yourself.
And do you ever worry about being so outspoken? Because your friend Thomas Drake, which hopefully will be on the show very soon, hopefully next month. I've been trying to get him on for a long time. I'm a huge fan, because I think he's a perfect example. I get in conversations with people, and they're like, "Oh, well, why doesn't Edward Snowden come to America if he didn't do anything wrong?" I'm like, "Do you not know anything about the CIA, John Kiriakou or Thomas Drake? People who try to do the right thing, and look how they get treated, and they go broke, they lose their families, they lose their friends, they lose. Publicly, they're looked at like they're villains, and they did something wrong, traitors. And these are people who took an oath to help the country, and now they're looked at like they've done, like they're traitors. And Obama's prosecuted more people with the Espionage Act than any other president. And on his website, he talked about how he's going to help whistleblowers, and now he's done the complete opposite. And it really makes me wonder, because you talked about meeting Bush when he was head of CIA, and how he seemed like a very delightful person. And it makes me wonder, when these people get into power, when they become president, are their heart in the right places, and then eventually they have so many other factors that, or maybe a lack of even power to make any real change or decisions? Or what is it? Or they, by the time you get to that point where you become the president, you must be already corrupt and already a part of the system, the corrupt system, and be a part of the game. It's like the Bill Hicks joke about JFK assassination. He talks about when you become president, they show you an angle of the JFK assassination that nobody's seen yet, that shows that he was shot by the CIA or Secret Service, and then they ask, "Hey, do you have any more questions?" And then they send you to your office. So it's this idea that is the president afraid of pissing off the right people, and or maybe there's just a lack of is it really just PR? Is the president just for public relations? He goes out in front of the crowd, he talks, people clap. I remember when you were asking those questions to Rumsfeld, and it's something that really annoys the crap out of me. Every time they say something, you have a room full of fans, and then every time they say something, people clap like they're saying something profound. Yeah. Same thing with the president. Every time he speaks, people clap and they say something profound. And you talked about how you're surrounded by people who might not have the balls and might not have the courage to tell you what they're really thinking, or to say no to you. And you're surrounded by these people, and then that has to have some psychological effect on your decision making. This idea that if you don't have somebody to correct you or tell you you're doing anything wrong, you can convince yourself of anything. You can convince yourself that you're doing the right thing and it's for good causes or whatever. And so from your perspective and actually working with presidents, meeting presidents, I mean, do you think that some of them do have good intentions and then once they become president, there's just a lack of power? Or are they just great liars? and because it does seem like to be a president, you to get there, you have to take money from lobbyists. You have to, do favors for people. You have to be able to promise things that you'll never end up doing, like shutting down Gitmo and stuff like that. I mean, it just seems like, in some sense, you have to be a good liar. It's like Roger Stone, who was on my podcast, on my last episode. He's a political consultant for Nixon and Reagan, and I don't know if you know who he is. He wrote the book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ, and just a recent one on the Clintons. But he's like Hollywood's, politics is Hollywood for ugly people, and it's Hollywood for ugly people. It's all theater. It's all people lie, but behind the scenes, people are friends. It's the same thing like Jesse Ventura has said. He's been on my show too, and he says that it's just like pro wrestling. Once you go, they look like they hate each other on TV, and then once they're behind the scenes, they're going out to dinner and talking about how they can help each other out. And I mean, what's your take on that rant I just had? Does
not that you feel strongly about this. Well, listen, I'm not a psychologist, and there have been good presidents and bad ones. The best, of course, was John Kennedy. The Cuban Missile Crisis gave him religion, so to speak. He saw how close we were to destroying the planet, and he made the right decisions. And in cooperation with Khrushchev, who was similarly kind of shocked by how close they came, they worked toward real peace. And most people don't realize that before John Kennedy was killed, he had signed 2 executive orders to get us out of Vietnam. One, to get 1,000 troops out by the end of that year, 63, and the other to get most of the rest of them out by 65. Now, he was killed. In my view, that's partly why he was killed. All this communist stuff is, he's soft on communism. He's talking to Khrushchev. He's talking through intermediaries. He's talking to Castro. Just crazy stuff, okay? Now, with respect to Obama, I just fast forward to him. I had such hopes for him. I can't really figure out whether he's just an out-and-out fraud, or whether you talked about manly parts, whether he lacks manly parts. I'm reminded of Colonel Davis, who was the lead prosecutor in Guantanamo. After he retired, somebody said, well, what happened to Obama? And he said, well, the only thing I can figure out is that between the swearing, the inauguration in the Capitol, and just walking down Constitution Avenue to the White House, his testicles fell off on the floor. Now, maybe that's simple. I don't know if it's anatomically possible, but so whether he's a coward, which I think he is, whether he just throws up his hands at all these things, whether he's afraid he could be killed, which I think he also is, it doesn't matter, because the result's the same.
when you say killed, you think afraid of something from the inside, or you think? I mean, obviously he was the first black president. There's a lot of people who are extremists on the right wing extremists who I'm sure he gets a lot of death threats from that side. I mean, but do you think it'd be a civilian who just hates liberals, or do you think it'd be something from the inside?
Well, this works in more subtle ways, Ricky. Now, one of the abuses that's occurred since Bush has been NSA has been collecting, and so has the FBI, collection on everybody, okay? That means your most private secrets are collected. Now, J. Edgar Hoover, when he was head of the FBI, he collected information on everybody.
Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
Wow.
He tried to get him to commit suicide. But, you know, when Frank Church of Idaho finally convened this committee to look into all these abuses, first thing he found out was that his home and his office telephones were tapped. Okay, they were tapped. Okay, so now here's Obama. everybody's got skeletons in the closet. Maybe Michelle does. Maybe he's afraid for his daughters. But if he's afraid, if he's got no real courage, which I'm kind of inclined to think that he doesn't have much, if any, then he's going to play along here. Let's say John Brennan, the head of the CIA, knows an awful lot that would just crucify Obama. Let's say the NSA has his data like that. It's called blackmail. I'm from the Bronx. I know what blackmail means, okay? So there are all kinds of subtle ways to keep somebody in check. But, they weren't going to do that to John Kennedy. Jimmy Carter almost brought off until they did him in, not physically, but politically, with the Iran hostage crisis. So there are hopeful things. And I have to say that despite the clownishness of the people who debate there, Trump and others, I have some real hope that one of the candidates on the Democratic side is what he says he is. And if that's true, and if we can mobilize the population to get him a Congress that will be a lot more reasonable than the ones we've had over the last several years, good things can happen. We can have a revolution, which is what he is explicitly talking about, a political revolution. Don't short-sight that. This is the time. There are so many people ticked off about what's going on in Washington that Congress could change. We've got a good president in there. I have hope that this time it would be different, and that my hopes for change would be realized rather than thwarted.
Yeah, I think the Obama thing, I think a lot of us got fooled. And I think a lot of it wasn't just because how likable he was, but I think it had a lot to do with how much we disliked the last president. And I think that he was so radically different than the last president. I mean, he wasn't, he didn't have a Southern accent. Well, I mean, Bush was born in Connecticut, but he put on a Southern accent when he was in the South. And he didn't come from this prestige family. He didn't come, there's just so many things that were different that I think deep inside we all hoped, cross our fingers, that he'd be different. And then he's not. And I think the same way we talk about history repeating and how we don't learn from history, it seems like I find myself also liking Bernie Sanders and the fact that he's so radically different. I like anybody who's radically different. When Ron Paul was running, I was a huge Ron Paul fan because I'm like, this is exactly what we need. Somebody to stir things up, somebody who isn't just a tad different than what we just had, but somebody who's completely different than what we just had. And obviously we know how that turned out. He didn't win. And I'm a fan of Dennis Kucinich, anybody who's willing to kind of stir things up. But I'm a little worried by the time Bernie Sanders, because again, he had to jump into he was an independent most of his career, and then to even be a part of these debates, which I feel like they're already trying to sabotage anyways, because they're putting them on Sunday nights when they're going against the NFL playoffs. Last weekend had the UFC fights. I mean, they're constantly on awful weekends.
Downton Abbey. The Saturday before Christmas. I mean,
yeah, shopping. Yeah, the last Saturday before the craziest shopping weekend of the year. So they have, and then the Republicans have them on Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays, which more people are at home, more people are more likely to watch. I mean, it seems like they're obviously sabotaging them. I forget which show I was watching where they talked about how the first debate Bernie Sanders won, and CNN was the only ones saying that they didn't, because every online poll said that Sanders won, and they constantly kept saying that Hillary won and how well Hillary did, and then at the end of the week they had their own online poll, and then it changed people's opinion to believe that Hillary did well and she won the poll. And it's amazing how we talked about before, how media can mold perspectives and mold opinions. And I mean, even when Ron Paul was winning, there'd be times that he did very well, or he'd be, his approval rating was going up, and they would just skip him on the list of candidates to talk about. They would just talk about everybody but him.
You want to see something funny? Look at the clip of, what's his name? Todd, the NBC guy.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Chuck Todd, yeah. Now, after the debate, he's talking to one of these high-tech consultants who's got a map, and he's got a map that shows different colors, how many Google searches were for Sanders, for Clinton, for O'Malley, okay? and the color for Sanders was purple, I think, and the whole map was purple. And so, so Todd says, "Well, does this mean what it seems to mean that in every state, in every region, the majority of the Google searches were for Sanders?" And the techie guy says, "Guess what it means?" Chuck Todd goes, "Whoa!" Now I don't know how MSNBC or NBC reacted to that in the next days, because I don't frankly watch television, but this open-mouthed shock that Bernie Sanders had dominated all the Google searches for the next, for the 10 minutes, or actually it was during the debate and 10 minutes afterwards, it came as a complete surprise. Now, this doesn't mean that the Washington Post, as it still does, and the New York Times still doesn't say, well, Hillary won, Hillary's great, Hillary's going to be fine. But you know what? You watch now, 2 weeks from now in Iowa, and then a little bit later in New Hampshire. I think we're all in for the kind of shock that will lead us out into the streets to get us doing what we did for Obama, except this time we have, I think, a better chance of having these promises, having these hopes not dashed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the reason why you see Trump doing so well. I think that's the reason why you see Bernie Sanders doing so well. I think is people are sick of the same old, same old. People are sick of these politicians who look and sound just like the last ones, who tell you exactly what you want to hear, and people like something that's radically different. And I mean, that's the only explanation of why Trump's doing well. I mean, I had Roger Stone on to talk about the history of the Clintons, and I've talked about the Bushes many times before with Russ Baker, who wrote the book A Family of Secrets. And I'm doing my best to try to let people know, like, whatever you do not vote for a Bush or Clinton, and it's going to be more of the same. The foreign policy is going to be more of the same, and that's the only thing that scares me about Bernie Sanders is his lack of being outspoken about his foreign policy. He really hasn't got into it. He hasn't really been outspoken about how he's going to handle these conflicts, or where at least like Rand Paul, he talked about, hey, he's coming back and he's going to leave it alone, like his father Ron Paul, even though he's very different than his father. But I like that idea. I think when you're talking about drone attacks before, I think it was Vice News who did an article about how many terrorists you create every drone attack, and how accurate they are. I mean, they're very inaccurate. I forget what the percentage is, but it's very low. There's always a very good chance of casualties, and you have to assume. And you look at the Doctors Without Borders that we bombed in Yemen. We did a wedding party once. We killed a bunch of people, and it's like people have to put us in their perspective. If I was at that wedding party and I had family members who died because of some foreign drone, you have to assume my life goal would be to get revenge, and
Well, that's precisely what happened. Remember the Times Square bomber?
Yeah.
He was a Pakistani American. He went back to his hometown there in the area up there near Afghanistan, and most of his relatives have been killed by drone strikes. I mean, he didn't look in the mirror and self-radicalize. He didn't do this picture that the FBI points. He goes and, hey, it's a pretty nice day to self-radicalize. Maybe I'll shoot up somewhere. Maybe I'll put a bomb somewhere. No, you don't self-radicalize. You get radical because of what happens to your dearest and nearest kin. So when he came back, he was determined to exact revenge, and he tried to blow up a bomb on Times Square. It was one of the stall sellers that caught him, not the police. Okay, now what's the answer there? Well, when he was arraigned, when he was convicted to like 200 years in prison, he said, "I'm proud of what I did. I did it to avenge the people who've been killed by U.S. bombs." Now it's that simple. Okay. Now when you talk about accuracy, people say to me, "Now, McGovern, these Hellfire missiles are very accurate." And I say, yeah, they're the most accurate missiles that you can imagine. But it doesn't matter if you don't have good information on the target. And we don't have good information on the target. How do you account for, McGovern, how do you account for all these people who, they're mostly radicals or militants that were killing, Yeah, that depends on definitions, sir. You see, the way the Air Force and the Army work it, uh, they shoot up like 12 people on the suspicion of them being terrorists, and maybe one of them is, but if the others are all adult age males, we count them as terrorists unless they can prove that they weren't terrorists, and that's really hard to do because they're dead and we're flying at 30,000 feet. Hello? So, by definition, everyone who's a male age killed is a terrorist unless post mortem they could prove, whoops, this guy wasn't a terrorist. So it's so disingenuous, it's so dishonest, and it's so stupid. So what's the advantage? To keep the war going. One thing I didn't mention before, and I should, in trying to piece through, Syria, what the? How do you? I mean, we want Assad to fall? Not really. What's going on there? Why didn't we just take out ISIS? Well, in October or September, actually, of 2013, after Obama stepped back from the brink, right, and he didn't do this war in Syria, there was a new New York Times bureau chief in Jerusalem. Her name was Jody Ruderin. Now, she was new and a little bit naive, so she said, well, to her credit, she said, let's go talk to some senior Israeli officials and find out what Israel's policy is on all this. And so she went to a fellow who was a consul general in New York and other people. And she said, what's your preferred outcome? And they said, well, this is a little embarrassing out of the humanitarian perspective, but frankly, our preferred outcome is no outcome. She said, I beg your pardon? And they told him to a man, they said, well, again, this is kind of awkward, but as long as we have Shia and Sunni at each other's throats, not only in Syria, but in the whole area, there's no threat from Syria. Israel is a lot safer. So, yeah, our preferred outcome is no outcome. Whoa. Now, how does that figure into the picture? Well, this way. In 2013, Assad had his act together and had pushed out some of these rebels out of the places that they occupied for the year previous, okay? Whoa. It looked like Assad might be winning, okay? If you don't want either side to win, what's the best way to ensure that Assad won't win? You know it. Get the U.S. involved militarily, okay? U.S. is not going to be able to prevail right away. There'll be more of a quagmire, but at least Assad won't win. And that was part of the motivation. That's part of the apparent contradictory policy that we're doing there. We want Assad to go. Why? Because Israel wants him to go. It's pure and simple. The Saudis want him to go. Turkey hates him, okay? Well, what trouble is Assad for us? Give me a break. No trouble, okay? But we're so wedded. This is something that George Washington actually warned against. We have this dedication to other countries that is not really worth dedicating our foreign policy to, and in this case, of course, it's Israel. Now, people say to me, "Well, that's all the neocons." Are you saying that they're? What would you say about the neocons? Well, I say the neocons who have been running our policy are people who have a lot of trouble distinguishing between the strategic interests of Israel on the one hand and the strategic interests of the United States of America on the other. Now, everybody's entitled to their own opinion. I don't begrudge them the fact that that's the way they look at the world, but I don't think they should be ruling the United States or fashioning U.S. foreign policy, and that's what they have been doing. Now, if you look at why they hate us, it's not only the drone strikes, it's what we enable the Israelis to do to the Palestinians and others. We give them the wherewithal, we give them the political support. They hate us for that, and that's evident for any onlooker, even somebody who's not a specialist in the area. which I'm not a specialist in the area, but you watch it long enough, you say, well, hello, there it is. It's not only the drone strikes, not only what we do in Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and Somalia and Syria. No, it's what we do in terms of enabling the Israelis to do what they do, which is really kind of reprehensible, and which is a part of our domestic scene. And unless we face into that, there's really not much hope that there'll be peace between Palestinians and Israelis anytime soon.
I always wondered what was the incentive, because obviously we do business with the Saudis, and obviously them and Israel don't get along. I mean, we play both sides of so many different conflicts and so many. I mean, it seems like it's all about whatever interest will help us, because this whole idea of like, oh, terrorism and it's Islam and all of this, it's just insane because you look at Sharia law. I mean, the most extreme version of it is in Saudi Arabia. I mean, they do more beheadings than all of ISIS combined. And yeah, is that the money sign?
I mean, that's where the oil is, you know. Even,
what about Israel? What interest do we have in it?
There we have really strong domestic considerations. Again, it's a lot of money. Okay, the Israelis have the capability and have demonstrated that capability of depriving a congressman or a senator from re-election. Paul Finley in Illinois, Cynthia McKinney down there in Georgia. I mean, if you get the Israel lobby against you, they have enough money to fund your competitor, and chances are very strong that you'll lose your seat. And, you know, the money is really important in terms of arms sales. Now, we give the Israelis, last count, $3.5 billion worth of arms. What does that mean? Well, that means we give them money, and they use that, or most of it, to buy stuff from our blood-drenched arms manufacturers and traders, okay? So there's big money in this. And, you know, I hate to say it, it really kind of sounds quaint, but it is the military, industrial, congressional, and now media and deep state, I mean intelligence complex. I mean, it's very close to what Mussolini gave as the classic definition for fascism. Do not blanch before the word.
Wow. Yeah. It's amazing. I know that I told you it'd be an hour. I think it's about an hour and a half, so I don't want to take any more of your time. Thank you so much for being with me, Ray. I really appreciate it. I definitely would love to have you back on. There's so much I could talk to you about, and your insight is amazing. I'll tell you, your memory is unbelievable, because how you remember dates and months that things happen is I always wish that I could do that, because most of the time I know half-ass information. I'm like, I'll get you in the ballpark, and then you can Google it, you know. So, but it's amazing how much information you have, and just it's awesome that you keep up with this stuff, and you're outspoken, and you have the resume that people can trust, that you don't have some hidden agenda. You're just outspoken, and you're looking for to do what's in your heart is right, and that's get people to get away from war. I think that's probably one of my biggest motivations too, is just, I mean, war should be a last resort. Anytime people are dying or being killed, it has to be a last resort. And I think that's the way we have to look at it. And drone attacks and all, the way we live today, it's the media doesn't show it. You look at Vietnam, people got pictures of what was going on. People saw the horror of it. Today we're in a war. I still go to work the same way. I still go to the grocery store the same way. I come home and I don't ever see it. So it's like it's happening, but because I'm not faced with it, and I don't have just refreshed memories of what war really is, the horror of it, and the bloodshed, then it's almost like it's okay, and I can just move on. Oh, we're in a war, no big deal. I'll just go on my day. When it ends, it ends, and we forget that there's people dying and for unjust cause. So I think that's a huge motivation of yours, and I think it's a huge motivation of mine, and that's why the show is called the Ripple Effect Podcast, because I believe in it's a simple act of having these conversations and sharing this information perspective. Hopefully it causes a ripple of just consciousness and changing people's perspective and really making them think about these issues.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Joe. See, my short-term memory
I wish my middle name was Joe, because then I'd be like, how'd you know that? But thank you so much, Ray.
And what I just encourage is everybody to kind of get out there now. Dr. Martin Luther King said there is such a thing as too late. But we're approaching that now. And, Mario Savio said back in the 60s, comes a time you have to put your body into the machine, make it stop. That's where we are now. No kidding, that's where we are now. So I wish you luck with your podcast, and I wish your listeners luck with figuring out how they can stop this, because there is such a thing as too late.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to get to the kids and people even younger than I am. I think they are the future. They're the ones who are going to be our next politicians, our next CEOs, people who are going to make decisions that are going to affect us all. And I think the good thing about the internet is that for a long time, like the common theme was money, this idea that we're motivated by money. And most people who are loaded, don't money-wise, they are not happy. And I think that people are learning that it doesn't create happiness, and this materialism and then just having the nicest car and having more. And I've said this before on the show, addiction to money is the only addiction that is not frowned upon in the world. I mean, if you're addicted to alcohol, if you're addicted to anything else, then it's looked down upon. But if you're addicted to money, the symptoms are the same. You can't wait to get it. You need more of it. Once you have a little bit, and you got your fix, you think about it again shortly after, and you need more and more and more, and it's never enough. The symptoms are the same, but yet we don't look at it as a sickness and as an issue. And unfortunately, because most successful people, and we live in a world of capitalism, and everybody they rate their success not based on happiness, but on financial wealth. We have this issue that most of these successful people that we all hope to be one day are just financially wealthy, and so to get there, we have to be cutthroat and be motivated by money. And I think the young crowd is getting away from that. I think we live in a world where you can watch Democracy Now! Every morning for free, and I can watch it every morning for free. And we don't need money to get the things we want. We can get information like this podcast completely free. I mean, this podcast is I lose money, putting it out there, and it's okay because I can put it out there for free. There's no ads. There's nobody telling me what I can or cannot do, and people can get this information for free. And I think people growing up in that generation, they're gonna lose a respect for money. So it's not going to be a huge incentive anymore, and people are going to hopefully look to what makes them happier and do things that make them happier, and not so much what makes them more money.
Yeah, I think to the degree that insatiable as an adjective becomes known for its true meaning, and you look at Wall Street and the other things that have been exposed, that people will realize, as you're suggesting, that being part of what my Irish grandmother used to call the upper crust, the game isn't worth the candle. And let me give you her definition for the upper crust. She was a seamstress who traveled around with a very wealthy lady around the then known world. Okay, and what she said was, "Now Raymond," and when it was serious, she'd call me Raymond. She said, "Raymond, you know the definition of the upper crust because you'll be working with them." I was working on the golf course. Okay, I was a caddy. She said, the upper crust is a bunch of crumbs held together by a lot of dough. Now, once you realize that the upper crust is a bunch of crumbs held together by a lot of dough, and that you're just as good as the best or the most rich of them, then you can kind of put your dignity and your honor and your honesty into play, and the upper crust will be put in their place.
Well, I think there is something to say about, I think Irish people they tend to be very politically aware and smart, and I think a lot of it is because their own internal, battles and their civil wars there and all that happened politically there. But I always, for some reason, I haven't met an Irish person who isn't very aware what's going on and seem to have an opinion, and I think that's awesome. I think we need to learn from people like yourself who have learned from even older people, and you've seen things from different perspectives. You've seen history repeat. You've heard stories and been a part of your own stories that you can share with us, and hopefully we listen.
Let me share one more thing, and that is, we talk a lot about empire these days, and My grandfather sat me down one time and he said, "Now, Raymond, do you know why the sun never sets on the British Empire?" And I said, "Oh, sure, yeah, I know." He said, "You don't know. No, sit you down and I'll tell you." He says, "The sun never sets on the British Empire because the good Lord would never trust the British in the dark." So a little bit of heritage helps, but nobody's got all the answers. And what I appreciate is the chance to kind of get these ideas out, and hopefully we'll get some reaction from your listeners.
Absolutely, absolutely, and hopefully I have you on again in the future. And good luck with all your future projects. And hopefully I see your face popping up on even more shows that I love to watch and hear your because there's always, it seems like there's just endless things going on in the news. So it's awesome to have people like yourself, just your perspective on what's going on. And like I said, you don't have an agenda, and you've been through a lot, you've seen a lot. So I think your perspective is very much respected, and I always learn something from hearing you talk, and today was no different. So thank you.
Thank you, Ricky, and good luck to you.
Thank you, Ray.